Hi, good evening. I'm Keith Gillis, Dean of the College of Natural Resources, and welcome to the S.J. Hall Lecture on Industrial Forestry. I've got the great honor of introducing our guest speaker tonight in just a minute. He's someone I have a great deal of respect for and have had the pleasure of getting to know over the years through his association both with our forestry program and with the college. But before I do that, I'd like to give a little information and background on the S.J. Hall Lecture Series. The first gift to support a lecture here in honor of S.J. Hall was made in 1968, so we've got a tradition that is 40 years strong here. Desi Hall and the Forest Economics Foundation went on to endow this lectureship as well as a chair in forest economics, the S.J. Hall endowed chair in forest economics, something I had the privilege of holding at one point in my career. And I believe the current chairholder, Peter Burke, from the Department of Agriculture and Resource Economics is here. We're really fortunate that Desi had the foresight and generosity to establish the endowment funds both for this lecture series and for the chair. It's meant a great deal to forestry over the years. Lets us have this event, which is really sort of a coming together for the forestry community in California, and lets us showcase some of the interesting public policy and research that's going on in forest economics and management on a regular basis. I'd like to recognize members of the Hall family that are here, that have made it their tradition to come. Let's see, can I find the Hall? The Hall's not here yet. Oh my goodness, well, we'll introduce them later. But we're expecting several, and I guess we've got a traffic problem. I'd also like to thank the Robert Mondavi Winery in Napa and the Joseph Phelps Winery in St. Helena for the wine that we'll be serving after the lecture, and a couple housekeeping details. We're holding both the lecture and the dinner for the California Alumni Foresters in the same space here, hence the way your tables are set up. So after the lecture, I'll need to have everybody move up temporarily for the reception, which we'll hold on the mezzanine. Give the staff of the hotel time to finish their preparation and set up for the dinner. So, housekeeping aside, it's now my pleasure to introduce Neal Ewald, who's Vice President and General Manager of Green Diamond Resource Company. He graduated from our program in 1978 with a BS degree in forestry. And since 1988, Neal has been managing the over 400,000 acres of forest properties that is held by the California Division of Green Diamond. His portfolio there has oversight over harvesting, reforestation, silviculture, wildlife research, tree improvement, timberland acquisition, really soup to nuts within the forestry field. In his tenure at Green Diamond, that company has really achieved some distinction in terms of their long-term landscape vision by having the first habitat conservation plan developed by a private landowner in the forested part of the state, in this case for the northern spotted owl. They've put a lot of work into their efforts to protect sensitive terrestrial wildlife and aquatic species, really a firm that is showing the rest of the industry how it can and should be done. So Neal, it's my great pleasure to welcome you here for the lecture, and the podium is yours.
Great, thanks. Well, thank you, Keith. It is a great pleasure to be here. I first stepped into these hollow grounds 36 years ago as a pre-med student with my eyes glazed over with all the competition I was face to see. And I see there are some people that I've met from my own native Humboldt County here who I think have gotten over that glazed look and are much more successful than I am. So it's good to see some home people in the audience tonight. Well, I'm going to start with a discussion of what I hope ends in peace. It may start out with some images that look a little bit like war. But what I'd like to do is get beyond images and get beyond perceptions. But I'm going to start with a slide that you see before you that is really just that. The picture you see in front of you is a clear cut. And for most foresters, they would look at that and see a field of lupin and wonder when they could find someone to spray it for them. But the great mass of people in the rest of the world see that as a wonderful, beautiful field of flowers. And so what I'd like to do today, what I'd like to do the rest of this 40 minutes before you, is to talk about pulling back the covers of that perception and really understand what's happened in the field of forestry. In my tenure, I'm going to start moving back a little bit further than my 36 years, maybe to about the time that S.J. Hall lecture first started. So let me bring the first image forward. This is what the woods looked like about 40 years ago when I first came to work, and I think it was Einstein who said that education is what's left over after you forget everything you've learned in school. And for me, one thing I do remember from being in school is a comment I heard from Professor Bill McKillop, who told me that the first thing you must do is understand your objectives. And these people, I assure you, knew what their objectives were, and there were two, and they were simple. They had to save the very expensive old-growth redwood that was on the landscape, and they had to do it in the cheapest way possible. And so this is a photograph from the National Geographic of 1964, I think it was. And it was the kind of landscape left behind after this kind of logging was what many people would call devastation. There was really nothing left here but the result of extraction forestry. And as I said, in 1964, that article led largely to the first redwood parktake. And the tool of choice for these folks was the D8 tractor. This one's actually an international TD25. We called it a corn binder, but it was a very versatile tool. You could build roads, you could use it for skidding logs, and you could build what were called layouts. And those were those pillows of soil that you put behind every tree to make sure that it's saved all the way to the end. And so that's the forestry that was being practiced here, again, when S.J. Hall's lecture first started. But it didn't end there, because the flat ground was we were running out of it. And so down the hill, we went with these tractors as far as we could get to. And when we got to the end of the road, we used these machines. This is a Skagit BU-199. It's one of the largest yarders ever made. It can stretch out a mile in distance. And its payload and capacity has never been rivaled by any machine since it was created. And so we built these big, wide roads to accommodate these machines. They weigh about 300,000 pounds. And so we built roads that could handle the water and the rain that fell in 60, 80 inches a year, with inside ditches that were quite wide and full bench roads. And we built them wide enough to accommodate logging trucks to go both directions. And because, remember, we only had two objectives at the time. We were only concerned about saving the value of the trees and about logging costs. And so we used those roads into the wintertime until the trucks were stuck, and then we pushed them out until it was no longer economic to do that. And then we were done with them, we walked away. And the roads weren't maintained, and the roads were left to suffer the fate that many roads do without routine maintenance. So, now, it was not my intent to make a church-like silence fall over the room, and I'm not trying to indict the loggers of the past. This wasn't just my company. This was the state of the industry 40 years ago. It was an extractive industry. And so it's no wonder that you see magazines, or in this case a book, that's printed. We gave them a lot of help. The images weren't hard to find. Although I must say that when this book was printed, they were quite old, and many of them were mislabeled and improperly described. But at the same time, largely, many of the criticisms, at least of the past, were valid. And so I guess what I'm describing for you is war. Really, there were folks on both sides of this argument who looked at the economics and the return that they were used to getting in this kind of forestry, and not willing to yield any of that to anything other than making money in the forestry business. And so it's not the pivotal event that made the change. In fact, that event, at least for my company, I think for many others, was the listing of the northern spotted owl. And I can think of no other event that caused more change in our business than the listing of this animal, and largely because it created two things in our business. One, obviously, changes on the landscape, but I think more importantly, a change in mindset about how we were going to tackle these issues that weren't just those two main objectives of logging costs and saving valuable trees. And so what was my company's response? Well, we wanted to find out what the truth was. So we hired 4 people who were on sabbatical. Our primary investigator was on sabbatical from Frostburg State in Maryland. He hired his summer students to come out and look for spotted owls, because we weren't supposed to have any, and this would be an easy summer job, and they can go back to work or go back to school. Well, it turns out we were finding more owls than we knew what to do with, and we had to somehow try to explain that. And our objective, and what became a mantra for us, is the simple phrase, and I heard it from a new employee just about 2 months ago, which made me thrilled, is that our objective is to know more about our lands than anyone else. And so we have tried to follow through with that. And so remember, this is 1990, this is our crew of 4. By 2006, we had 27 people engaged in some kind of investigation about wildlife or fisheries or rare plants or geology to try to know more about our landscape than anyone else. Because it became clear to us that we needed to figure out ways to deal with these complex environmental policy issues in the most efficient way possible. And so I'll give you one more glimpse at the future before I go back to the past. This is what our conservation planning group looks like now. There are 49 people engaged in some activity related to data collection or analysis on our landscape. I would argue that we have more scientists per acre than any other piece of real estate, perhaps in the world. If someone knows anything differently, I'd love to hear the statistics. So what did that mean for us? What did we find? Well, when you study owls for as long as we have, you become the expert. In fact, we've got the best, the most robust data set. We know more about owls, our owls, than anyone else. We have some of the highest densities recorded anywhere in the history of the owl on our landscape. And here's what we found. We found that lands that look like this are attractive to owls because they can nest and roost in the mature timber, and they find that the young stands, I don't have a photograph of this, but they eat a prey called the dusky-footed wood rat. And so when you put the grocery store next to the condominium, you get essentially, you get a great number of owls. And the reason I think that our methodology of trying to find out what's going on and do it in a scientific way, using data to drive the answer, the reason I think that's successful is because we can get folks in the academic community to follow us and agree. And in fact, that's just what happened here. If we had just simply been proclaiming this through assertion without using science to back it up, I'm not sure how long it would have taken for this graph to be built. This is created from a fellow named Franklin, who came to the same conclusion we did. It took him 10 years to do it after our work began. But his view was that as stands are fractured, that habitat is better for owls than either obviously fully clear-cut stands, or at least in the Redwood region, stands that are fully occupied by mature stands. So that was the conclusion, the simple one for the time we have today about what we found with the owl. We took that same ideology to bear on what's going on with the fish populations. This was a much more complex problem for us, and it took a lot more data to come to bear with an answer. So, but the seminal question is, how many fish do you have and where are they? So we put in some very expensive fish monitoring devices. This is a downstream migrant fish trap. And just like loggers who show you the biggest picture of the biggest log picture, I'll show you the biggest fish trap picture we have. There's 7,000 young of the year Chinook salmon in that box, which took a long time to count, by the way. But it's collecting this data. Data doesn't lie. Data is the only power of truth that we have to deal with these complex problems. And so we knew we had a lot of fish. In many cases, they rival the production of the Redwood Park pristine watersheds. So what was driving it? It wasn't uniformly that way. So what was driving it? Well, we did some investigation of the substrate of these streams. We measured the so-called Thalweg profile and found that streams are generally becoming more complex, more pools and riffles. We borrowed some outfits from the Ghostbuster movie. That was my first joke, so you can laugh if you want to. But we took some measurements of turbidity and embeddedness and found that wasn't necessarily the problem. We looked at temperature, and whereas temperature in the past used to be very difficult and costly to collect, with new technology it costs you $100 and you deploy a meter that you can collect at the end of the summer and collect some really cheap measures of temperature. And the good news is we found that our streams are reasonably cool. So we found that wasn't a problem for us. We also measured hundreds of miles of stream for large woody debris. And this is not a lecture on fish biology, but large woody debris is very important for the life cycle of fish. In fact, we created, at least in our view, a model of how the fish react on our landscape, and determined that it's like a bottleneck process that from spawning through outmigrant fisheries that you'll through outmigrant production, that there are several bottlenecks that are important. And for us, the most important of those were the winter and summer rearing habitats, and it was both driven by the same phenomenon. The reason that they were bottlenecks in our systems is largely because there was not much large woody debris on the landscape. So, as I said, we investigated many years of data collection before we took action. In the case of the owl, it took us about 2 years to take the data we collected and build a plan to manage our lands in concert for owls. And we created the first habitat conservation plan for the northern spotted owl, done by a private landowner. I mean, governments and cities had done them before, but never a private landowner. We did that in 1992. And it was built on the basis of the findings of our data collection. And we thought, well, shoot, it took 2 years to build a plan for the owl. Well, we know a lot more about fish, don't we? It shouldn't take that much longer. Well, we were surprised, significantly surprised, because the aquatic plan, it was not just fish, but 6 species, a salamander and a frog, took 10.5 years from beginning to end. And largely it was because we were chasing the collection of data that led us to what we thought were the best set of measures to deploy conservation on our property. So what does that look like on the landscape? Well, this is a typical stream zone of some vintage back when the first spotted owl plans were written back in 1992. And whereas most everyone else was able to harvest trees, harvest near stream zones and take most of the trees, we left them behind because we knew that leaving legacy trees behind was critical to owl habitat. That got expanded significantly with the fish plan, and whereas today, we find that a stream, fish-bearing stream now, we have a 300-foot wide swath of trees, 150 feet either side as protection zone. But when you lay that on the landscape with the number of streams we have, fully 25% of our landscape is set aside in one fashion or another for one reason, to benefit fish. And what about terrestrial changes? We talked about the aquatic side, but we're not going to simply turn the blind eye to the animals that need things beyond the stream zone. But this is what the landscape looked like, again, 20-odd years ago. We cut down every snag we could find so that we could use helicopters to apply herbicide. But we no longer do that. In fact, we leave every snag we can, every piece of complexity we can to benefit wildlife, because why not? And we'll talk about why it's not important for forestry reasons in a moment. We also want to recruit trees that that are beneficial to the landscape. In fact, you find that a lot of people disagree about the trees in the middle, but not very many people disagree about the trees on either end. And what I mean by that is, if it's a wildlife tree, it's pretty obvious, and if it's a timber tree, it's pretty obvious. And there's only a few kinds of trees in the middle that are worth even talking about. So we tripped to the idea and created this. I think we call it the Terrestrial Deadwood Management Plan, because we love long titles for things. But every tree gets a score, and when you get 7 or more points, the tree's retained on the landscape. And it's retained in places that look like this. Not just the tree, but the clump of trees around it, because it's that 2 to 5 acre spot that really attracts the wildlife going forward. And often harvesting units will look like this. If we have a lot of complexity, they'll look like units that are so-called variably retained on the landscape. And when you put that from a unit basis to a landscape basis, we get landscapes that look like this. And this is all even-aged timber harvesting. The trees across the ridgetop themselves are eligible to harvest. The rest are retained for one reason or another. So you might ask yourself, so what? You leave trees behind, does that do any good? Well, this is an example of an aerial photograph of a watershed that was being harvested when the owl was listed. It had some of the highest densities of owls recorded anywhere. And when we first started to deploy the owl plan, we did it here. And so the retention here isn't anywhere near 25%. In fact, it's more like between 5 and 7% retention. And we anticipated that this landscape would be useful for owls at say, age 35 or 40, when the young stands were that old. Our owl biologist got a flat on his bike one day in this landscape, and because he is the biologist that he is, he hooted owls all the way home, and found out that a spot where a few trees had been left behind was the home for an owl. In fact, he spent the rest of his summer on the weekends doing the rest of this research, and this area has 10 owl sites in stands of timber. The young timber is 17 to 20 years old. And it's because we've left these things behind. And he's beside himself because he could see that his formula is actually working, and working significantly faster than we thought. So are we done? No, there are a lot of things left for us to do. This is an example of 4 rare plants we have in the landscape. I'm proud to say the one on the upper right was thought to be extinct until we found it. It's so-called belly plant, meaning you can't even find it till you get down on your belly and search for it with a lens. The one on the left is something called running pine, and the great news there is it's very easy to find a conservation measure to manage it on our working landscape. In fact, we have one that's approved by the folks from Fish and Game. The rest of these plants we're working on, but that's what this is all about, where we're going. We've also collected 10 years of data on the Pacific fisher. It's an animal that we think enjoys many of the same habitat benefits as the owl. This cute little creature is the red tree vole. I would caution you never to pick one up. They are really vicious. They're cute on the picture, but they'll bite the heck out of you. I know that from experience. And this is a cute little animal I don't know much about. This is the Humboldt Martin, so-called. And the question here really is, there are many martins across the West. The question is there a Humboldt Martin? Is it uniquely different? And even if that's not so, is there something we can do if we have places to have martin habitat on landscape? What can we do to benefit that? So those were the measures that we took on the landscape for fish and for conservation planning. We also changed our landscape for other reasons. And as I said, what many people have called moonscape is what it looked like when I first came to work. Well, what does it look like now? Well, in 2002, we changed our logging business. And we did it for reasons of garnering efficiency. We wanted to make it less costly, not unlike the objectives of the old loggers. So we moved to what we call mechanical logging. And here, this is a shovel, that's the machine in the background, bunching for a skidder. And it did indeed increase production, and it was a great way to reduce logging costs, but it created landscapes that look like that. Now we got retention outside the stream zones, we got a nice stream zone in the middle, but you've got skid trails that scar up the landscape. And that wasn't good enough for us. We're one of the last remaining company logging businesses. We have our own loggers we hire as company employees. And so we're, I guess you'd say, in the business, we're nimble. And nimble enough that we could let go of our view of efficiency and try something new. And we did that just 2 years later. And in 2004, we moved entirely to shovel logging. And the advantages of shovel logging are that you eliminate every piece of machinery with a blade. And if you're not making any dirt off the end of a blade, you're not making any dirt. And a great example of that is this photograph. If you look at the green side on the left, you'll see a harvesting unit that's 5 years old. You can still see the skid trails there. And not only does that dirt expose itself with water bars and need to be protected, but also it's potentially moving off site. On the other hand, the site on the right was shovel logged, and there are no ground disturbing events there. In fact, we've moved shovel logging. It's generally used on relatively flat ground. I wouldn't say perfected, that's an end state. We're perfecting moving it onto steeper ground. In fact, we're holding hands now with conventional cable logging. In other words, there are no tractors on our landscape, and I would invite everyone here to see me after this and come for a tour, and let's go find one, because it's just remarkable. You won't do it. And the land looks wonderful. This is a typical harvesting unit. This was a photograph of a couple of years ago. And what's remarkable here, for those of you who are production oriented, you'll notice right away that the clear-cut area on the right of the stream zone is a yarder piece with cable logging, and the one on the left was shovel logged. The one on the right, I think, has more ground disturbance with cable logging than the shovel logging piece. In fact, we took the folks from the State Water Board on a tour in January to show them that we could actually make this work, and they were impressed with the outcome. That's not to say that uneven age management has its place. It certainly does, but there are trade-offs. There's no right or wrong. That looks great. That's not a clear cut. But that's what's underneath it, and we just have to understand that there are trade-offs when we make choices. But we don't favor we do favor one system over the other. We're largely even age managed company, but that doesn't mean we are exclusively even age managed. And you'll find out here in a moment why we're going to make some more changes to selection harvesting in the future. But we also manage for uneven age systems in view corridors, where we think it makes sense to avoid a clear cut in someone's windshield. But in my view, that's the second biggest change to affect the environment that we've made over the years. And the first one has to do with our road system. We have about 4,000 miles of road that were built by hundreds of different owners and thousands of different people, all to the standards of the day. and they all need to be upgraded. And this is an example of a huge failure. This is the kind of thing we're trying to eliminate on our property. And so we've identified the most slide-prone areas, the places we call imminent risk of failure, and over the next 4 years, we are identifying those and eliminating them from the landscape. And here's an example, as again, you take a picture of the biggest fish, took a picture here of the biggest amount of dirt moving here. This is about 30,000 yards of sediment we're moving from one spot. Some units are like that. Some places are egregiously in risk of failure with ticking time bombs, and we want to take them off the landscape in the next 4 years. But it's not just things that are going to fail, also things that are bad in place. This is a hanging culvert. It's not so bad because fish can't get up there. It's that the little ones can't get back up when they get down, and the ratcheting that happens with small fish also has an effect on the environment. So we put bridges in place. And when we take old roads out and put new roads in, we eliminate the huge pile of fill, add lots of rock to the upstream areas, and it looks like a garden, almost a Zen-like feeling when you go to the woods these days. And remember, I said our roads look like this. This is an example of a road that was typically being built in 1975. This is a new road construction. These are much narrower. Inside ditches are gone. These are outslope roads. And we're doing our best to make the road prism on our property as small as we can. When we put rock on our landscape, we put it on to a foot thick, and the most important thing we do is not use it when it rains. And you'll be surprised how much money we save in not having to regrade a road because it was plastic when you put a truck on it, and you put way too much weight on the road, and you have to rehabilitate it later, not to mention the fact that it pumps fines that get into the ditch system. And so this is the proof of the pudding. What does all that mean? Well, this is a recent photo of the mouth of Blue Creek. This is the mouth of a managed watershed that's flowing into the mouth of the Klamath, or to the edge of the Klamath River. And because we've made not just declarations, but demonstrations of what we've been able to find on our landscape, the Water Board recently approved our permit as a way to demonstrate that we're in compliance with the requirements of the impaired waterway in the Klamath River. So to me, and if those of you who've dealt with the Water Board, that's a tough showing. Those people are not easy sales at all. And I don't think you can do it without bringing data to bear on the question. Well, what other changes have we made to our landscape? This used to be one of the most fun things I did, is burn with what was called Alumigel and gasoline, otherwise known as napalm. You drop it from a helicopter and do broadcast burning. And although it was quite fun, that created landscapes that were sometimes too sterile. And that's moved away to commercial collection of biomass. This process now is about 25% of what we do. We collect it and make electricity out of it. The only thing I don't like about this is we have tracked equipment on our landscape. You see there he's making a little more ground disturbance than I like to see. We used helicopters as well to apply herbicides in the past, and that's given way to ground-applied herbicides. But more importantly than the method is the extent to which they're used. Since 2003, we've cut our herbicide use by 50%. And we can still maintain an effective free-to-grow status for our trees, and I'll show you what that means here in a minute. We have a nursery in Corbell. We produce about 2 million seedlings, mostly for our own use, although we'll sell them to anybody who will give us a proper return for them. But this is the kind of result we get. These are superior trees that we've selected some of the best. That's a 6-year-old tree that's 12 foot tall. And we were able to find this spot 12 or 6 years later, and that's what the tree looks like today. So when you compare the two, that's a 12-year-old example of regeneration on our landscape. And this is a picture I took a few years ago of me hugging a 17-year-old. That's one of our prime selected trees. We've planted at the nursery many years ago. And that is what the future holds for us. But what's not widely known is I manage 2 forests. I manage the forest I've created, and I manage the forest I inherited. And this is an example of a picture taken, I think, to discourage people to approve our brand of forestry. But this is a stand of timber that has live crowns that are way too short. It's way overstocked. And as someone said to me not long ago, this is a stand of timber where you need to set the reset button. We have many stands that are too overstocked, that are understocked, or too old. We have some that are just right, like the baby bear in the story. But this is an example of what the interior of that stand looked like. So the foresters in the room will look at this and say, yes, I don't think that's a very good stand for you to practice any kind of selection harvesting in. And we've done it. I've done almost every anything wrong in my career. If we do that, you'll find that most of these trees bend over. But here's an example of a stand that's exactly the same age, and the only difference between those two is it was treated differently. And the treatment was it was pre-commercially thinned at age 12, and it was commercially thinned at age 38, I believe. And the yields between those two stands, just in volume, is this second stand has 64% more yield than the first one. So who would not want to do that? And moreover, this stand has 20% more on that 60% more hardwood. Now this is an example of a 29-year-old stand. This is the one that I can lay some claim to have created. In fact, we have thousands of acres that look like this, and this is on the yield curve growing well beyond anything we find in wild conditions. And what the exciting part of my job is right now, we have thousands of acres that are 30 years old and less, that are well stocked, they're right on the trajectory, that we have something to work with. We can do something other than hit the reset button. And so for us, there are two objectives I'd add to the ones you heard before, aside from the environment. The second one is how are we going to grow something of value? Obviously, we want to do something that makes sense in the social context for environmental protection, but we also want to make our shareholders happy. The perpetual business part of this really comes to bear on this question: what is a ripe redwood tree? And there's been a lot of discussion about that. Well, the first thing you have to do, again, is collect some data, and this is data from our landscape collected this year. This is the percentage of heartwood by log size, not theoretically deployed, but collected from a bunch of trees that were fell in the woods and applied to this graph. And the objective is for us to find this sweet spot, the place where we think these trees are ripe, and then to create a system that grows them as fast as we can. And it's not just about growing volume, it's about growing heartwood. And the best thing that I think that we could do for our owners is provide a valuable stand of timber that is the maximum amount of heartwood you can produce in the shortest period of time. And that's really a simplified version of what our objective is. But it even gets better. I mean, sometimes I have to pinch myself. I really love my job, because here I am at the edge of being able to take these old forests that someone handed me and turn them into something that can really be valuable. And so not only can we do that in terms of making logs, but we have a sister company that makes lumber. And redwood is unique, in my view, in that you can market specific types of lumber. If you were to do this with Douglas fir or pine, you wouldn't find anybody willing to pay you money for the California series of redwood or Douglas fir boards, but I think you can in redwood. In fact, we've spent significant amounts of dollars this year betting that we can market redwood. And the best place to market redwood is a point of sale in the front of the store. Most of our competitors who sell things like composite boards and things that are recycled but not recyclable, those people have learned the story of marketing. You get in front of the store at a point of purchase display and you sell it not in the back in the lumber yard, but you make your appeal up front. So we're trying to do that with what I think is a great story about how we can manage these lands. So I want to take you through the series of photographs I gave to you here, or that I presented here a moment ago. This is what I would call war. This has all the visual aspects of being something that no one would look forward to. No one aspires to create something that looks like this. And if you can fast forward time and see the progression of how the landscape has changed, the fundamental question is, can we have peace? I was tempted to use the Tolstoy novel title of War and Peace to describe the end result here, but I think, in my view, we have tackled the demons. We have done it in a way that has substance. We're not just proclaiming that we know what we're doing. We have, I think, the credentials to suggest that we do have some real staying power in how we're managing these redwoods. It's not just an assertion. You have to use data to do that, both in terms of what you are finding in the marketplace and what you're finding on the landscape. And so when you do that, the risk is that you fall into the trap of thinking you've figured it all out. And so let me be the first one to tell you this is not the answer, this is not the end game. I'm not here to tell you that I can figure it all out. I'm here to tell you that the only formula we figured out is that you must continue to investigate it. We must continue to work on this. If I were to come back here in my scooter chair in 20 years and tell you what our forests look like, I'm hopeful it would be significantly different than this. And because what I think I've done is fulfilled the promise that I was asked to when I became a manager of this company, is make this landscape better than I found it. I work for a family company. They're in the 5th generation of owners. And the other day, this was 3 or 4 years ago, the owner came to me and said, or one of the owners came to me and asked me what I was doing for his grandchildren. Well, his oldest daughter is 17 years old. And so this is a family that cares about what these forests look like. And they've given me the license to be able to use some expensive data collection processes to reveal that. So again, you've met the luckiest guy you've ever met. I get to work in this field for this company doing this work at this time. I couldn't think of a better place to be. So with that, that was my crescendo of an ending. And so with that, I can answer any questions you might have.
So is Simpson Timber Company one that graduated into the Green Diamond resource?
Yeah, the question is about our pedigree. Who were we before Green Diamond? Many people ask that question. We were a Simpson Timber Company for 108 years, I think, and then decided, well, enough of that. And no, that was a joke. Again, 2 jokes in one presentation. No, the reason we decided to split the company into 2 is because the manufacturing side of our business is more focused on a short-term perspective, and a long-term idea in a manufacturing business is 5 years, and we routinely plan for 50 and 100. So we split them off for strategic separation. So Simpson became remained as the manufacturing business.
Neal, it looks like one of the reasons you're so successful is you've got redwood. And I'm wondering, are fir and hardwood, are they increasing in your stands? And what are you doing to market or utilize that resource?
So to answer to address the first comment, yes, we are successful because we have redwood. In fact, the redwood premium allows me to be so flamboyant with the owner's money, frankly. I don't think you could do this kind of work. You couldn't hire 49 biologists unless you had a redwood premium. Now, I don't look very good right now because the market's not very good, and we didn't lay off these 49 people. This is the 2010 org chart. So we're holding 49 people in a market like this. I know that wasn't your question, but I had to give that its due. And the second part of your question was what's happening to Douglas fir and tan oak on our stands. And we do try to favor redwood. Many of the stands we have are artificially populated with both fir and tan oak. We have many stands that were beautiful Douglas fir stands that were harvested just after the war, and it was essentially a wholesale conversion to tan oak. So we are trying to convert those. The biggest problem we have is people don't appreciate the true value of a tan oak log. And so it's been very difficult to get people to buy it so that we can convert the stands back to redwood and Doug fir.
So you are trying to convert it?
Yes. Yeah, we're trying to convert it back to redwood and Douglas fir. And redwood, of course, is the primary species for us. But Douglas fir is always going to be a component of our stands. Just even if we don't plant it, it seeds in.
Neal, I have to ask if your shareholders are happy.
Well, yes, they are. I think largely because we've led with our chin. We have demonstrated that I think that when we say something, we do it, and so we get respect in the regulatory community, and because of that, we get our permits processed, and people trust us, and so we guard that trust jealously, but part of that is being able to take on the role of a person who is in a public trust job. They want to make sure that the environment is clean and they're not extirpating species and so on. So we try to embrace their objective. And so that has helped us. Now it's more expensive, but it helps us in other ways in terms of how permits are processed, and the delays that are inherent in this business don't accrue to us as much.
And the second part of that is, do you think another type of shareholder would be equally as happy? That is, I mean, you have a group of shareholders that are basically family, very narrow. If that were expanded to more of a financial base, so taking a different type of shareholder, do you think that they would be equally as happy?
Yeah, I think there's no question. Our shareholders take the long view. They take a generational view of this management. But that just makes me feel obliged to make sure that they don't have to press me by the quarter. I have to do both. I don't have the luxury of deciding I'm only going to take care of one thing. So we really do have to make money. We have to make money in reasonably, level amounts by quarter, but we don't have to be greedy about it. As an old friend of mine once said, pigs get fat, hogs get slaughtered. And what we're really trying to do is make sure that we have a viable business, but we want to make sure it's a viable business in the long run. And so our shareholders are happy. Others, if a more short-term approach may not, a quarter-to-quarter approach may not be as happy with our performance. Yeah.
One thing a young fellow like myself starting out in forestry likes to hear is that companies are taking the long view.
Yeah.
I'm interested to hear your thoughts on the way that you guys are handling regeneration. Seems like most of your regen is artificial regen, and I'm wondering if or how you guys are considering the trade-offs between growth and yield and having the plasticity to deal with a changing climate.
Yeah, that's a great question. First of all, it's really hard to do a bad job in Redwood, I have to tell you. That's the other reason I'm lucky. It's hard to mess this up. Virtually all the Redwood we have sprouts, right? And so we get a coppice system, and many of the stands that we create, we don't have to do anything to, right? So we get to all the coppice regeneration that you find in an uneven age stand, but we have the luxury of being able to fill the openings. And so we're filling the openings with the best trees we can find. And what you saw is an example of not the sprouts, because I wanted to show off the good work we were doing by picking good trees. So you saw an example of some of the trees that we've taken some work on. And we've been doing research in tree improvement since before I came to the company. So since about the mid-'70s, we've had someone engaged in tree improvement for tree selection. So, again, it's the same mantra. Let's figure out what the answer is and then work from a place of data and fact rather than just speculation.
I want to give you a little history. You and I went to a forestry summer camp in 1976 together. You probably don't remember me, but it's been a long time. I am currently, I've been working as a building contractor here in the East Bay for many years. I've used Simpson Redwood to build decks, and I've enjoyed using them, but the quality of the Redwood seems to have deteriorated in the past decade or so. So the contractors like myself, we've looked for different materials to build decks with, and you talked about the recycled products, the plastic boards. Recently, I had to tear down my own rotting back porch, and I'm not using Redwood to rebuild it with. I'm using Ipe lumber, which is sustainably harvested in the Amazon basin. Clear lumber, beautiful, all heartwood. So, it's something I felt was superior. It's very hard lumber as well. But if what we saw in the slides, you're starting to raise larger diameter redwood logs with more heartwood, fewer knots, higher density wood. That would be great, and that would probably make your product more saleable. Right. Because otherwise the low density has a lot of cracks and other defects besides knots too. Yeah. So it made it less attractive in the past decade.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that comment. I agree that we have taken a commodity focus on our lumber. And by doing that, you put skip on lumber and wane on lumber. You do all the kinds of things that you would do in Douglas fir. We can't do that anymore. And we need to make a product that comes out of the sawmill with the little defect as possible, in my view. Also, to a certain extent, the quality of the log that I push into lumber, as I said, I've inherited that. To a certain extent, I can make changes to it. I can do thinning where it's possible. I can try to grow more heartwood where I can. But the analogy I use of how to manage this business, it's like steering an aircraft carrier. I've got a huge permit process in front of me, and I've got a long tail behind me. And so it's very difficult to make changes overnight. But we need to listen to you. We need to listen to people who are using this product and make changes that we can, and then make changes that, 30 years from me doesn't seem like all that long ago. So maybe if we do something today, 30 years from now, we can have someone here thanking me for having gone to forestry school together.
Given the mosaic you've created, more complicated mosaic than before, any data yet on deer the black bear or the ever controversial mountain lion?
Yeah, we have lots of data on bears, because bears eat our trees. They strip the bark off in the spring, not just ours, but all of them. And we don't have any data on deer because it's not controversial, frankly. And mountain lions, we've done some studies with the state parks, I think it is. And my anecdotal information is that I think we have the same amount of deer that we did when I first started, more bears and more mountain lions. And you would think there would be a countervailing effect with more mountain lions, but it doesn't appear to be so. But I think that our landscape probably supports a robust set of all three of those animals.
Okay, and then secondly, on the War and Peace analogy, North Coast also has a lot of Earth First, Julia Butterfly Hill, tree sitters.
Yeah.
Do you get blowback from them, or do you engage with them at all?
Well, we have some folks that are, we have, I think, 2 people in trees now as we speak, and it's difficult to deal with folks who tell you that they're not willing to compromise. They just have demands. It's like they're trying to hold you hostage, and they're not going to be happy until you do what they want. I'm happy to talk to anyone. They've never come to my office. They've never called me up. They've never done anything but go up a tree. And so those folks, I think, are ideologues, and I think they're doing that because it's sort of a way of life. I'm happy to talk to anybody who has a view about what we do. In fact, we do that routinely. I think we should do more of it, frankly. But the folks that hang out in trees, it takes a special personality to want to do that, and we don't have a continuing dialogue with them.
Is your corporate structure for Green Diamond a REIT as opposed to the wood processing side of the company?
No, we're not. That's a real estate investment trust, I think, is the REIT. No, we're not. We're a privately held company with individual shareholders. So we're not. You can't buy stock in our company. You can marry into it.
I passed that stage.
Yeah. Me as well.
Trees are going for electricity. Are you generating the electricity, or do you sell the feedstock to somebody else?
Yeah, we sell the feedstock too. There are 3 power plants in Humboldt County, and we'll sell to the highest bidder and the best return, which often is 0. But it's better than having to deal with the slash yourself and put a fire in the woods.
So I saw that picture of the grapple grabbing the slash, and then it looked like it was putting in some kind of a tray. Are you moving that to a landing where you're chipping it and then taking it in, or are you putting it in a dump truck and hauling it out?
Yeah.
Or do you not want to tell me?
No. Well, I gladly tell you, because it didn't work out very well. But as I said before, I tried many things, and many things don't work. In fact, if you're not doing something wrong, you're not doing enough, in my view. And this was something that didn't work out. This was a slash bundler. So you make little sausage-like casings of slash, and it makes great sense to do it. It just, the economics are all upside down. And it doesn't look like they're even close enough in the prototypes to get them close to make sense in the field. So it's frankly, the best way to get slash to the landing is leave it on a tree, bring the whole thing in, and strip the slash off along the edge of the road. But we haven't been doing that yet because there's no consistent market.
Hi, Neal. Thanks for coming. Couple questions. One, I'd like you to comment on kind of the market for carbon offsets and that kind of whole issue and where you think that may be going. And secondly, I'd like you to step back and just reflect on California forestry broadly, the forest products industry and the profession, and the changes. I guess I'm noting that we as a state used to supply most of our lumber, and now we import about 80% of it. And I just wanted you to maybe speculate on where you think what the future holds. Thank you.
So the 2 questions were about carbon markets and where I think maybe the supply of timber might be in terms of California's demand. Is that the question? Close enough?
Yeah, first one you got. The second one is really broadly, what do you think of the future for the forest products industry as far as we know it's, you've candidly stated it's easier in a sense in the Redwood region, but you also have a lot of other regions, and in total, we're importing a lot more wood than we ever have, ever.
Yeah, I get it. Okay. Well, first of all, the question about carbon, what do I think about carbon markets? I think they're not reliable enough to take action on. That's about as simple as I can say it. You know, if someone tells me a reliable stream of income from that and what I need to do to get it, then I'll stand up. I got a lot of other things that are taking my time at the moment. I mean, we have a lot of people taking, you know, studying what's going on, but particularly the way the economy is generally, it just seems like it's going to be a tough row for people to pay me to grow my trees differently. And, you know, I look at the world two ways. There are the income state people and the balance sheet people. I'm an income state person. In other words, I think you can grow more carbon like an income statement and grow more value and set that value aside and sequester carbon. Other people think that the only way to make carbon sequestering work is to set aside, like an asset, a big chunk of carbon. But I once had a forestry professor here who told me that he'd give me a case of beer, which was a big deal at the time, if I could find a cubic meter of soil in California without charcoal in it. And of course the answer is you can't. You remember Paul Zinke, of course, but the only place you can is a mangrove swamp, I think. But the fact of the matter is all trees burn. And if you're going to set trees aside, ultimately those you set aside will likely burn. And so that's longer winded than you wanted on carbon, but I think it's an interesting question about what we can do and feed those markets. Generally speaking, about where we are with supply, you know, with California's ability to supply the markets, I think 30 to 40 years ago, this school and many others like it produced a lot of foresters who did a lot of good work. And where I just showed you some photographs of some stands that I'm extremely proud of. In fact, I planted some trees in some of the land that I manage today, and we're likely going to thin those. And I'm going to cut some of those trees down myself and log them and bring them to the landing and make lumber and put those trees that I actually grew the lumber out of in my house. I may be the only person, I'll brag about being the only person able to do that anyway. But the fact of the matter is a lot of foresters like me graduated and built a lot of great forests. A lot of people that are doing the job I do today are also hitting the reset button. So I think, maybe this is a question for Bill Stewart about what the productivity will look like going forward. I believe that we've done some great work, and you're going to see the per acre yields of timber in California go up. Now, whether that's enough to sustain the demand in California, not likely, but it's going to help.
I just had a question similar to this man's question here, in that he alluded to the fact that the timber industry in Humboldt has historically been not just an environmental issue, but also political and socioeconomic. And you've made it very clear that you see Green Diamond moving towards a more environmentally sustainable future. Do you see it playing a major role in economic and political stability in Humboldt as well?
Yeah, I think I know what you mean by economic and political stability. The best way to be economically and politically stable, I think, is to produce sustained products. And we had a plan that would have allowed us to continue to produce at a level amount, and the only adjustments we were going to make to that plan is where we increase our output. And I love hiring people for long periods of time. I hate laying people off. Last year I laid off 86 people. And it wasn't because I didn't have the timber, but in the first time in my career I couldn't sell the timber I created. And so I hope this recovery has a bend to the right, and it starts to feel like a recovery rather than just a cessation of the problem. And maybe just that flat part of the economy will allow us to be more stable. But my view is this is an economic engine. This is some of the most productive forest land in the world, and if we didn't have this business, we'd want to create it, particularly because we can have our cake and eat it too. We can have owls and clean water and wildlife, and I think sustain jobs forever. It is a perpetual motion machine. Great. Well, thank you all. I appreciate the opportunity.
Well, that was a wonderful overview of the history of the North Coast, technological change, the evolution of corporate responsibility, a land ethic, That was great. Thank you very much, Neal. That was a wonderful talk. Before we break for our reception, I just wanted to point out that the Hall family has arrived. And I think we've got Susan and David and Dorothy Hall over there. If you'd raise your hands, and their son Kenneth. Thank you very much for coming. Everybody here owes them a debt of gratitude. Thank you.